I have heard a lot of people that experience PDA say it's more accurate to describe it as avoidance of anything that threatens their sense of autonomy, right? So their own control over themselves and their life. In fact, a lot of people prefer to think of it in a less pathological way. People can also avoid everyday tasks like brushing their teeth or getting dressed, even going to the bathroom at a certain level. And it's not always when somebody is asked directly from another person. It could be that there are expectations, like from an institution like school or work, societal expectations, things like that. Maybe he doesn't actually like the sport that he's very good at and that he's being forced to play by his parents. Maybe he's had a bad experience or even trauma related to coaching or to male figures in the past. Framing things as a collaboration, giving him agency. This will probably go a long way. There's nothing inherently broken about this kid, which I know you know already, but there might be some ways to make things more collaborative, put him in control. Again, keep that mindset of he has a very high drive for autonomy, not he's defiant, and that might help you out. All right. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. Today, I have a question and answer episode. 2 questions here, really good ones. I'm excited to get into those. Before that, please, if you would like to send me a question for the show, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com or go to my website, duffthepsych.com. You can look at the contact page there, as well as all my blog posts and other resources. I wanted to give you an update really quick on my progress for my bipolar book. I haven't talked about it in a while, but I'm still working on that bipolar book. Actually, I have it over here if you're watching the video. This is my manuscript for it. I've been going through and doing edits. So I just finished the last round of adding things into it. Aside from the final chapter, I still need to do that. Maybe some appendices. Anyway, my next job is basically going through and doing kind of some specific grammatical things, structure for formatting, rather, things like that. But it's definitely coming along. And if I were to drop this right now, it is kind of a full book. So, yeah. I keep saying it's going to be coming out soon, but, the progress continues. And I really, really do want to put this one out. So, yeah. That's the update. I don't think there's anything else. Let's go ahead and jump into the episode proper. Here's the first question. It reads, "Greetings, Dr. Duff. Thank you for all that you do. I've listened to every episode of your podcast, and it's helped me on my own mental health journey, and all the information and advice has made a noticeable difference in how I show up for others in the world. My question is regarding pathological demand avoidance. I work in an individual sport coaching and teaching role, and one of my students seems to display signs of PDA. He's very talented and invested, but is very resistant to simply being told what to do. Do you have any tactics for sidestepping this demand avoidance when teaching kids? Thanks for being you." Thank you for the question, and thank you for the compliments about the show. It's awesome and crazy that you've listened to every single episode. I feel like I need to get some sort of commemorative thing, like a medal, or, they have those challenge coins from the military that they've co-opted for other things. Some sort of memento for those of you who have been here from day one or who have gone back and listened to everything in the whole catalog, because that's a lot of hours. That's a lot of hours of me talking. So I appreciate you. The topic of PDA is an interesting one, and by PDA we don't mean public displays of affection, we mean pathological demand avoidance. Now, this is more of a symptom than a diagnosis itself. It's actually not a diagnosis. It's something that has gotten a lot of attention in recent years, and there are many people out there who endorse the symptom of PDA, but it's not officially part of any particular diagnosis, at least right now, as the time that I'm recording this, which is, in February 2025. That could change in the future, but right now it's not. But in general, PDA is associated with things like autism, also ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, and some other mental health or developmental conditions that impact somebody's behavior, especially when it relates to social behavior. PDA itself is defined as an overwhelming need to avoid or resist demands or expectations. However, I will say that as I've done more research and talked to more people about this, gotten more personal experiences, I have heard a lot of people that experience PDA say it's more accurate to describe it as avoidance of anything that threatens their sense of autonomy, right? So their own control over themselves and their life. In fact, a lot of people prefer to think of it in a less pathological way. I mean, it's even in the name, right? Pathological demand avoidance. Sounds very clinical, sounds very bad. And so instead, a lot of people consider it to be more of a high drive for autonomy rather than avoidance of demands, right? So it still causes people difficulties, but it's less of a, again, pathological negative frame and more of there's a high drive there. So it's like describing somebody as like bad versus energetic, for instance. So a lot of people prefer to think of it that way, and I like that. But PDA itself, it can present differently, many different ways, depending on the individual that's experiencing it. There are some more overt, obvious things like, being told to take out the trash or do your homework or go do XYZ chore or task. Those things people with PDA might have a hard time doing because they've been asked to. But people can also avoid everyday tasks like brushing their teeth or getting dressed, even going to the bathroom at a certain level. And it's not always when somebody is asked directly from another person. It could be that there are expectations, like from an institution like school or work, societal expectations, things like that. Just the sense, again, of that autonomy being threatened really triggers that tendency to not want to, or really it feels like not be able to do those tasks. People that are more in this mode of avoidance, they might consciously or unconsciously use different tactics to evade demands, like distraction, trying to do something else to distract from that, making excuses, or engaging in role play or fantasy. So especially for people who are on the autism spectrum, they may go deep into their mind and role play or engage in fantasy as a way to not feel like they have to do these things. So whether you're talking about somebody who really truthfully does exhibit PDA as we know it or not, there are clearly some signs and similarities in what you're talking about in the question to see that these tendencies are limiting his ability to improve and engage in whatever the sport is that you're coaching him on or teaching him in. So I'm glad that you're thinking of ways to help him. That's really awesome. And I think that says a lot about you as an instructor. So some advice. I think that focusing less on the defiance part of it and more on the concept of that high drive for autonomy can be really helpful. In other words, he isn't trying to be a pain. He's not trying to be a pain in the butt or make things difficult for you necessarily. He really just wants to be in control of his own destiny, which at a certain level is kind of great. That's awesome for a kid to want. So I wonder if you might be able to have him take more of an ownership role in his training, where you're able to support, you're able to provide instruction, but the ideas about how to structure things are more collaborative. For example, rather than telling him, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z in a given coaching session. Today, we're going to do this drill and that. Maybe instead you can start by reviewing what you worked on last time. So what the last session was like, and then ask him, what do you want out of this? What do you feel like we should work on today? What do you want to improve on? And do it in that, again, very collaborative way. If he doesn't know exactly, if he says, I don't know, you're the boss, even though there's that kind of back and forth between you guys of asking something and then having that avoidance of the thing. If he doesn't know, you could provide some options. That's a good sort of next step. So giving options and making sure he still has some degree of autonomy, right? We can do cardio focused, we can do skills training. I think maybe either one of those could work. How about, what do you think? So giving some choice there can definitely make a difference. I'm not sure what extent to which you may have actually talked to him about it, right? Addressed it, but I would encourage you to try to engage with him about it. There's probably a lot that you don't know about why this is happening for him. So it's great to come into it with an open mind and curiosity, and especially ask open-ended questions just to feel out the situation more. If there is an underlying neurotype like autism that's contributing to the PDA, that could be the answer in and of itself, right? There's not too much more you need to know other than that. But there could be other factors. For example, maybe he doesn't actually like the sport that he's very good at and that he's being forced to play by his parents. Maybe he's had a bad experience or even trauma related to coaching or to male figures in the past. I think you're a male, writing in this question. I apologize if you're not. I think I remember that you were. Regardless of how you identify, trauma related to people that look like you in leadership, coaching, authority sort of situations, right? So any of these things could be the case. We don't really know. So I think, again, being curious, asking, engaging, treating him like a real human. I'm not sure what the age range is, but regardless, even if he's 6 years old, you can still treat him like a human. And to be clear, you don't need to be his therapist, but leveling with him and just asking some open-ended questions could be a great start. Especially instead of being very negative and accusatory, right? Rather than saying, why don't you ever listen to me? You might ask something like, how'd you feel about last session? Right? Open-ended. And you don't have to always fill in the gaps. If you say, how'd you feel about last session? And he goes, oh, I don't know. You don't have to go, okay, well, I thought blah, blah, blah. You can just sort of sit back. And if he goes, what? You say, I'm just curious. I would really love to know, like, how did you feel about last session? I'm just trying to get a feel for things. I have no idea. And just try to, elicit that information. You could also share a little bit, kind of disclose. You can say, I feel like last time there was kind of some friction between us. Like, I don't know, maybe I wasn't getting the best out of you. Maybe you weren't getting the best out of me. Do you notice that? Do you have any idea what I could do differently? What could I do differently to make it better? I noticed a change there, not could I do anything differently? That's very close-ended because the answers can be yes or no. Very often it will be no. Instead saying, what could I do differently to make it better for you? That is a more open-ended thing that he has to think about, and the response isn't yes or no. So again, framing things as a collaboration, giving him agency. This will probably go a long way. And if the coaching sessions that you're having are very serious in nature, you can also try adding more fun and playfulness into it. Like for some people, it's a lot easier to follow through with tasks when they feel like a game or there's some sort of fun element to it. So rather than focusing on the idea of training and working out and improving performance, maybe there are some funner things that you can do. Games, maybe you can include some metrics to make it more enjoyable. Like I have no idea what the work you do actually looks like. So I'm just spitballing here. But like, let's say that you require cardio. Like there's a lot of different drills that you need to do to work on agility or cardio. Instead of focusing on those individual different routines, drills, whatever it is, maybe you can keep track of like total yards run during that session and have something fun, like a little progress bar that you use I'm thinking like Velcro, putting it along like a progress bar, using a favorite character or movie or something like that. You can have a fun reward, like a song they really like when they reach a certain goal. You could even do something silly, like you have a song playing that they love, and every time they, reach a certain benchmark, you turn it up a little bit so it gets like super loud, and if that's okay where you are, something that's just silly. Whatever. These are just ideas that hopefully get you thinking, but taking a little bit of the seriousness out of it, you just, I think, could benefit from that. Another fun thing you could do is have them boss you around a little bit. Like if you're able to, physically, and if it's appropriate to do some of the training with them or have them run you through a drill before you have them do it, they might have fun with that. Again, that collaboration and also the feeling that they get to control things a bit. So they get to make you dance like a monkey, and then they'll want to do it as well. I know that you're being paid for a specific task here, that you have a job to do, but ultimately it's not life or death, right? You're talking about sports. And if there are ways to reduce the stress of the environment and inject a little bit more fun, I think you'll get even better results out of him. So I hope that this helps give you some ideas, right? So thank you for the question. All right, so on to question 2. It reads, Hi, Dr. Duff. Thank you for your podcast. I've only listened to a few episodes so far, but I'm really enjoying it. My question is that I seem to have chronic low-grade depression, and I'm not sure what to do as I've tried meds and therapy. I've experienced trauma in my childhood home for years, but I received treatment for that. I've been on and off antidepressants and therapy since my mid-20s, and this just won't budge. The antidepressants help, but the side effects are unmanageable for me, especially the sexual side effects. But I'm so frustrated that as soon as I go off them, the depression instantly comes back. I have no trouble with my diet or sleep. I'm generally healthy, no alcohol or drugs, very limited sugar. I work full-time in education, and I'm raising 2 boys with my husband, so it's busy, but I have a great life. The problem is I can't enjoy it. I can't remember the last time I looked forward to anything. I'm usually either upset or anxious or just blah. My psychologist recommended doing things that I enjoy, but I don't enjoy anything. I don't even look forward to summer vacation with my family. I'm functional, but a mess inside. Please help. All right, thank you for the question. This is one I think that will apply to many people listening, so I appreciate the opportunity to dig into it a little bit. What you're describing sounds a lot like what we call dysthymia, or more appropriately, persistent depressive disorder. Dysthymia is kind of the old term. We now call it persistent depressive disorder, but they're pretty interchangeable. And I'm not diagnosing you here, but it sounds similar. It tends to be a somewhat milder in terms of symptom intensity, form of depression. And so it's a little bit more mild on the symptom side than major depressive disorder, but it lasts for a long time, often over the course of years, which fits with what you're talking about here. In my experience, this sort of unique effect can be really difficult to deal with, because instead of having these episodes that you can recognize and you can cope with until they pass, like, oh, I'm in a depressive phase, I need to do these sort of things to keep myself safe, I know it'll pass eventually, you basically just have to live your life in the context of never feeling good. And that's shitty. That can be, as I said, really maddening, really difficult to deal with. And I hear this in your question, right? You talk about how you're doing well on paper. From the outside, everything is pretty good, and you can identify all of those great things in your life, but you simply don't feel happy. You don't feel pleasure. And that can drive you crazy. I imagine there's times when it also makes you feel like you're doing something wrong. Like, what's wrong with me that I can't enjoy all these awesome things in my life? So I'm sorry that you've been going through with this. I think I can offer a few ideas. Hopefully it's helpful. First, let's talk about what your therapist brought up. You said that they told you to do things you enjoy, but you don't enjoy anything. Totally valid. And that's exactly kind of the point. I actually have a whole chapter about this in my second book, Hardcore Self-Help, Fuck Depression. It's on Amazon, on my website. You can check it out. And it sounds like your psychologist may have not really explained the theory or the technique very well. But what I think they're tapping into here is what we call behavioral activation. That's a strategy that they use in cognitive behavioral therapy or more strict behavioral therapy. But in behavioral activation, what happens is you acknowledge that you probably don't feel a lot. You probably have anhedonia, which is the symptom of not being able to feel much of anything. And you probably also have low motivation because of that. What's the point of pushing so hard when nothing feels good? But the idea is you need to force yourself to engage in activities essentially to help your brain learn how to be happy, learn how to feel pleasure. And this is very true at a neurotransmitter level. You're essentially rewiring your brain and teaching your brain to enjoy things. It may sound silly, but that may need to happen for you. So in terms of strategy, the first thing you may want to do is develop a list of things that could potentially be enjoyable for you, right? Not things that are enjoyable. We know that that's not a marker that's fair to look at, but things that could potentially be enjoyable to you. So it could be things that used to make you feel happy, like when you were a kid or any time when there was more joy in your life. It could be things that you've always wished that you enjoyed, right? Things that you would like to be able to do and get something from. Things that you see other people enjoying and you're like, God, that'd be so nice. I would love to be able to do that with so-and-so. Those are all good starting places, but just come up with anything you could think of that would potentially be enjoyable to you. You can see a version of yourself where that is enjoyable. It's just not right now. Now, this is where a lot of people get tripped up because they will start to feel guilty about being sort of indulgent here, because you need to treat it like your job to force yourself to do these potentially enjoyable things. People feel like it's self-indulgent or irresponsible or a waste of time. Why am I doing all these things for myself instead of like working hard or something like that? Not to mention the guilt of doing something and not really enjoying it right away, right? So say you invite a friend to go take a class, or you go drive go-karts or whatever the hell, and you actually don't really have that good of a time. You might feel guilty because you feel like you wasted their time or you wasted your money on something that didn't make you feel a lot. So that's something that does require a little bit of pushing through. One good strategy that you might be able to do is anticipate some of that. Much like when you're doing an exposure exercise for anxiety, where you maybe write down on a card what's probably going to come to your mind as a self-limiting belief and how you want to deal with that. You can do the same thing here, right? You might say, oh, I'm going to be hesitant to go through with this because I'm going to feel like it's a waste of money, right? So you anticipated that when that punch comes, you're going to be better able to shimmy to the side and, dodge it. So again, the guilt, it's okay that it's there, but this is part of the process. My suggestion for that list is to list out all of those ideas and then categorize them or rank them from easiest to hardest. So in terms of effort, easiest to hardest. And then you want to go through and rank them or assign a value to each of them for how rewarding those activities could potentially be. So for example, something like going to see your grandmother across the country before you don't have the chance to anymore might have a very high potential reward, very meaningful for you personally, but it could be potentially very difficult to make that happen. Money, time, all those sorts of things. Now, instead, if you love going to the movies, or you love movies, maybe not going, but you love movies, and you decide to take yourself out to a screening of one of your favorite movies, a classic that you have always loved on a weekend when you're not working, that might actually be substantially easier for you than going across the country and still give you a pretty good bang for your buck in terms of the potential reward there. And that's the key. You want to look for these activities with the best balance of effort to that potential reward and just keep doing them. As I said, in my book, I have a chapter on this, and I actually kind of break it down in terms of, a numerical value for each of these and finding the best bang for your buck activities. But it's pretty straightforward, right? Which things have a lower effort threshold and a higher potential reward, and just start hammering away at them. I think that the 5-minute rule is also very applicable here. The 5-minute rule is something that you can use if you're not feeling motivated or you're feeling hesitant to do something. You're basically, your brain is trying to hold you back from doing it. So rather than committing to an entire experience, you only commit to 5 minutes of trying. So if I said, okay, I want to go today to the arcade and play some pinball, right? I don't have to, that's a very personal one for me. I love playing pinball, right? So that would be pleasurable for me. But if I said, okay, I'm going to go do that today, I don't need to commit to going for an hour or two. I only need to commit to 5 minutes. I can go walk in. If it's too loud, if I hate it, I can leave. So that's the trick. If you hate it after 5 minutes and you can't stand it, you are absolutely allowed to quit guilt-free. That's not required. You're only required to do 5 minutes. But what often happens is when you start and that 5 minutes is up, the next 5 minutes is much easier. And then you could just keep rolling on. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes, indeed, you do need to quit and try again another time or try a different activity. But you'd be surprised how well this can work, right? You get started, 5 minutes later, you're like, okay, this wasn't that bad. 5 minutes later, you're like, I kind of enjoy this. And then an hour goes by, 2 hours go by, etc. It doesn't have to, but it can work that way. So the 5-minute rule, that's something that you can use to get yourself started on these. And then taking a left turn away from the behavioral activation part, I do want to talk about, other options for treatment. You said that you've tried medication for depression and that it does help when you're on it. That's a good sign. That means that you're not so deep into your depression that nothing is going to make it budge. However, side effects aren't something that you can easily tolerate. You mentioned the sexual side effects. For anyone that isn't aware, the most common sexual side effect would be difficulty orgasming, so anorgasmia. And for some people, that's really hard to deal with. For others, interestingly, it's actually a desired side effect to prolong orgasm. So for people who might have, premature ejaculation, they will actually use SSRIs as an off-label treatment for that pretty effectively. However, for you, I wonder if you've tried different medications. I'm not sure, maybe you have, but the most commonly prescribed type of medication, as I said, is a SSRI, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And those are pretty notorious for those sexual side effects. Also, it can cause some weight gain. There are plenty of other options outside of SSRIs, though. For example, one of them is bupropion or Wellbutrin. Those are the chemical and brand name for it. There are very well maybe other brand names too. And this works more on norepinephrine and dopamine rather than serotonin. And because of that, it doesn't usually cause sexual side effects. It's known to be very light in that department. And it also tends to be more activating than other antidepressants, right? It tends to increase energy, which can be really helpful when you're struggling with that energy and motivation to get started on things. This is just one example. There's also a combination medication that was FDA approved a couple years ago, which is called Auvelity or Auvelity, not sure. That's the brand name, Auvelity. And that is bupropion, that Wellbutrin we were just talking about, and also dextromethorphan. I don't know how to pronounce the chemical names. Basically, what's Robitussin. So it's a cough medicine. And when they're combined, it actually increases the antidepressant effect. Because Wellbutrin's interesting. A lot of people have great experiences on it, but for depression itself, it is effective, but it's often preferred as an adjunct and add-on treatment. So this makes it so that you can increase the antidepressant effect and find that size of effect that you're looking for. This is just one example, though. This is one of those situations where working with a good psychiatrist can make all the difference. Because if you would love to take a medication that works but doesn't give you the side effects, there may be options out there for you. Beyond medication, there are also non-pharmacological approaches. I've talked about some of these before. If you go to my website and search for some of these key terms, you'll be able to find other episodes. But things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, so a very low impact but high frequency treatment to stimulate your brain using a magnet, like an MRI magnet, that has been FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. There's also ketamine treatments. This can be done IV, or there's a FDA-approved nasal spray called Spravato. There's also lozenges, different at-home treatments. These can be used to reduce depression pretty dramatically without those lasting side effects. So in situations like this, I would want to consider those, and I would also really want to dig deep and see, is there something else that's driving the ongoing depression? For example, people that are unable to open up about part of their identity. They might be high functioning, but constantly depressed under the surface, right? So say somebody is transgender, but they can't be out, or, their sexual identity or any other part of their identity. They just can't be honest about that. So they're forced to live in this situation where they can't be authentic. That can be a very good driver of that low level constant depression. You can get by, but you're never going to feel quite right. Or maybe there's something else, something fundamentally wrong with your relationship or with your job, something that you don't really want to think is the culprit. And so instead you turn that back on yourself. I'm not trying to say that I know the answer to these questions. I'm not picking up on anything in particular in your question, but it's always important to consider the possibility that your depression isn't something that's just broken in you. It's a reasonable reaction to the circumstances that you're in. Just something to think about. But truly, you're doing so many things right. I don't blame you for being frustrated when you're like, I'm literally doing everything I can. But I hope this response gives you some hope that there are still some options out there for you, maybe some things that you haven't thought of. There's the medication options, the non-medication options, the behavioral activation in a more structured way with your therapist. And of course, if you don't feel like you're getting the right care, if you feel like you need a different approach in therapy, something that's more nuts and bolts rather than supportive, or maybe something that's more related to the past rather than the present, any of those are okay, and you can find new providers. Same goes for your psychiatrist, if you have a psychiatrist or whoever is prescribing medication. So don't give up on this. You are one small tweak away from getting some relief, and I really believe that. Best of luck. And with that, that is the end of the episode, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, please give a like or a comment, anything you can do on the YouTube video. If you're listening to this on the podcast, share it with a friend. Give me a review if you feel like that would be good for you to do. I really, really appreciate any of that kind of support. It's the best way to support me right now. And I will see you for the next episode, which I believe will be an interview. Bye, guys.